towns and lots of different.
That makes it good too, if you know, going by the towns and you're trying to do surrounding areas that the family moved to. The early families did a lot. I mean, they settled a lot, but they also moved on to another wilderness type of thing.
Yep, exactly.
And so there are similar county histories.
For other counties,
Other counties.
Yes, and we have a couple of them here. Yep. Let's see, in fact, they give some sketches of prominent people, local people in the Androscoggin County history. They talk about specific businesses and list them out and talk about how they were founded and who directors were and things like that. So it's an outstanding resource. If you're looking at anything and you're trying to find somebody, it's worth consulting the county history as well as the town histories. Yeah, we have Cumberland County back here as well. Kennebec County. Penobscot County. So you can get beyond Androscoggin County, from this room if you need to. Okay, so as you've the next resource will be the next set of resources will be on this case over here. And this is where the town histories start. Okay, and town histories sometimes can provide the details or clues that you need to track down an individual's story. I remember as I was working on the Irish here in this local area, well, Jacob Roke was one of the early big Irish names here in Auburn, and well, they're big names, and he's part Irish. His father was Irish. I haven't looked up his mother's line yet. But in researching his life, trying to figure out who he was and where he came from and everything, the place that I found that information was in the Durham town history. The Auburn materials said that he was born in Durham, and so eventually I went to the Durham town history to look and see if they had anything on the family, and McGuire they did. And all kinds of detailed information on him, and I think one of his brothers was also somebody well-to-do during his time. But they gave some clues as to their family's origins and birth dates, and so all kinds of clues to go the next level in from the town histories. He also, this particular person, Jacob Roke, happened to be a revolutionary, or his father was a Revolutionary War veteran, and so in tracing him, he came up from Massachusetts and went through Yarmouth, and so looking at the Yarmouth town history, I got a sense of who he was dealing with, because he apparently came up with a group of soldiers who either were from or were settling in Yarmouth. So it was kind of interesting to find out who his father's associates were as well. And these are Maine towns, and they extend over onto this bookcase and around the back. There are also some other New England state town histories on the other side of this case. So folks in Auburn, the West Auburn area was populated by people from Bridgewater, Massachusetts, for instance. Most of the early settlers in West Auburn were Bridgewater, Mass people. So there's I believe there's a town history of Bridgewater, Mass on this site, which exceptionally.
There are vital records for Bridgewater also.
What's that?
There are vital records for Bridgewater also.
Yeah. So our out-of-state collections aren't extensive, but we may have the ones that really apply to this area. So as you before you head off to someplace in Massachusetts for that information, you might, or wherever, you might check here and see, just to see if we do happen to have have some of that on hand. And on the back side of the case here, with town histories, locally we'll do a plug for Professor Hodgkin. Doug has done some fantastic work over the years, but here's a relatively new set of books on Lewiston. That's the transcriptions of the Lewiston town and city records. Okay, except if you're like me and you're researching relatively recent immigrants from the early 1800s up, these books are a fantastic resource.
It goes until 1863.
Yeah, it's only up to 1863, but it covers a big gap. Again, for me, researching the Irish came here in numbers in the late 1840s and 1850s. And again, this is well before there were birth, marriage, and death records kept at the state. And I've got clues in here that I can pursue individuals and families.
And it includes vital records as well for
Right.
that period. So
Yes.
it's the town meeting records as well as the vital records.
Yeah, and you'll find people mentioned in both.
Yeah.
It provides lots of specific genealogical information as well as some contextual information. And for that time period too, Doug's other book,
Yes, because I was.
we're going to make this as valuable to you as we can. Is Frontier to Industrial City, Lewiston Town Politics. For contextual information, as you use some of the other resources in here, you're going to run into terms and the names of offices, and you're going to run into all kinds of things that you don't understand because we don't do them that way anymore. And Doug does a great job of explaining those things in this book, so that when they talk about a measurer of bark or something like that.
Hargreave.
Or say, Hargrave or whatever. I mean, some of these things that we just don't do anymore are explained in how schools ran, how they were districted, things like that. Gives you a good contextual background, so you can compare it with how things have been done during your lifetime, and then as you write your family history, you can convey, you can do some interpretive work of your own by looking at how it used to be and comparing it to how it is today, and perhaps pull some meaning out of those sorts of things. Also, starting on this side is most of you are familiar with city directories. This is where the Lewiston and Auburn city directories are. Back on the back side here, and on this case over here. The directories are full of lots of information beyond just the individual listings. Okay, again, as you're trying to provide some contextual information, there are business advertisements in the directories. The later directories will give a reference. If somebody does have an advertisement, they give a reference to what page it's on, and you can go find the ad fairly easily. But if not, sometimes it's worthwhile just to thumb through, and if you know somebody had a business, to thumb through the advertisement pages and see if there's anything there for you. But other things that are other information in here that's particularly interesting are, they list out the community organizations. Okay, the various Masonic organizations. If you're researching the Irish, they tell you something about the ancient order of Hibernians, the Rebeccas, I mean, whatever groups, all of the various groups that were active at the time, they have listings in here. And so as you're trying to put some meat on the bones of the people you're researching, and you see somewhere that they were a member or might have been a member of an organization, you can research the organization and tell the story of that, paint the story of who that organization was, and that will make your individual come more to life. There's also lists of the streets. Street names have changed. Okay? So when you find a listing in the directory and you can't find the street today, then you can consult the front of the directory, and they list what the streets were and where they were located. Okay? I know that I had difficulty initially. My Irish people lived on one of the patches, and a patch was a very low-income neighborhood for new immigrants, Irish immigrants. And there were, 6 or so here in Lewiston and Auburn, and nowhere could I find anybody to tell me what a patch was when I got started on this. I mean, my people were always, Jeremiah Murphy was always listed as living on the patch. Everybody else had a street address. Mine was on the patch, on the patch, on the patch. Then I noticed, well, there are a bunch of other Irish names around his, and they're all on the patch too. And so I eventually figured it out. And later on, in later editions, they do describe where the patches are as well.
On that same topic, I recently was talking with a person who had an ancestor living on Franklin Street in Lewiston, and she was certain that this was the house on Franklin Street that he lived in. Well, it turns out that Franklin Street now is Park Street, and the houses are no longer there on Park Street. So, in that part of the street. So
Yep.
you have to be very careful.
Oh, let's see, what else? Oh, yes, they list the buildings as well, the major buildings and blocks. Okay, and which was helpful to me as I was developing this ethnic history of my group, trying to track down what buildings might have been built by Irish people, and looking through the names. But sometimes businesses are listed as simply as being in such and such a block. It doesn't give a street address; it just says it's in
Pillsbury Block.
Yeah, Pillsbury Block or Union Block or what have you. But there is, rest assured, there is a directory in here to tell you where that block is located. Okay. Let's see, what else? Yeah, we talked about organizations. There are business advertisements. There are also some fairly extensive lists of who was in city government or was working for the city in almost any capacity at the time. I mean, they list out the key fire personnel. They list out the key, not even just the key people, but almost all of the school personnel as well. So if you happen to have had a teacher in the family, or suspect that you may have, you might find her listed in the city directory. She might not be listed in the individual listing, because they tended to list just the male. But if you go flip back and you knew she was a teacher, you can look at the Lewiston schools, and they'll list people by school who the teachers and the principal and so forth were in there. So lots and lots of, if you haven't looked through one of these in detail from cover to cover just to study it as a resource, it might be worth your time to do so, to see what kinds of information, other kinds of information you may not be aware of is in there.
Can you tell me who the publishers of
There were a couple of different publishers, and over time, this particular one is 1885, and this one was done by W.A. Greeno and Company, and they were out of Boston. And most of the early ones were Greeno.
Is that G-R-E-E-N-O?
O-U-G-H. Milk Street in Boston.
U-G-H, okay, thank you.
And later on, it was Manning's directory.
The earliest ones here.
It was a profit-making enterprise that essentially did a census. They would go around and collect the information.
And the later ones did include everyone in the household, including my father was listed as boarding at his father's because he was over 21. So he was listed as a boarder in his father's household.
Yeah, this one, this is the earliest one that we have is 1860. And this one was published by Stanwood and Company, and I don't know who they were. But it was printed here locally by Waldron, who was the journal printer, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? What do you do if you have different dates? When you look up different books that have different dates on it, what do you do in a case like that?
They're published annually, so these are like your telephone directories before there were
Okay, so that
telephones.
they'd be more up to par, because I have even my, where I was born and my marriage date, they had it wrong compared to on some things, you know. So,
Yeah, you have to take
what do you
every,
do in the case like that? Do you put both dates down?
yeah, I would,
You
jot
would?
down everything that you find, just as you find
Just
it.
look, okay.
And then, once you think you've got everything, you've covered every record you can find, then you just have to do some analysis of, well, which record is the most believable.
Okay, like Ancestors.com, they got me married May 1st, it said May 26th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ancestry.com, a lot of
I
that
find a
is,
lot of errors,
yeah, well, it's people that are doing
the research.
their own research, and so
Okay.
they put it up, so it's only as good as the person doing the research. They might misread a entry
It
in a
depends on who, how well they can
So I didn't
understand
know
the
what to do with it.
Spencerian
Do I
script
put
that
both
they're
of them
reading.
down, or what?
Well, if you know that something is
It's
correct, you can actually, there's a way that you can tell Ancestry.com, this is not right. You can do corrections on Ancestry.com.
Yeah, with genealogy, as with any other, serious research, as you're doing your research, you don't, in addition to the information that you find,
Yeah.
it's critically important that you write down where you found it and who that was, okay? If you found, some of these directories have death dates in them. If somebody died within the year, they will often give you the date that this person died.
And sometimes it's the death date, and sometimes it's when the death date was published, and sometimes it's when the will was probated, and so there's a lot of different dates that different people can interpret as the death date.
So as you go around, as you collect, it's important to be thorough and get as many records as you can, tombstones, whatever, and you may find that three of them agree, and because they're public records, they're probably more believable than, let's say, a directory or somebody else's work, some other amateur genealogist who has done some work as well, and you have no idea what this person's qualifications are.
And
So you just have to judge
the date of the
which one.
26th might have been when that was actually published in the town, the date of the, okay,
I had
it was
two birth
recorded.
certificates when I went for my passport, and I had two birth certificates. My grandfather emphasized his name, so my father was like Russo and Brooks, and I was the first child born. It took a while for them to second my passport.
I have some email that I want to take.
Okay, another resource connected with the, once you've looked in the city directory and you've got an address, you might want to see what that place looked like. So over here we have some old maps. And most of these are Sanborn maps. And Auburn is covered best. We only have one Lewiston map, but a Sanborn map. The Sanborn Map Company made insurance maps. So, and most of you have used some maps. How many of you are familiar with the term Sanborn maps? Now, we have hard copies here. If we don't have what you need, or if you want to do a more extensive search, the Maine Historical Society, on their computers, they've subscribed to this document, and you can get several more versions if you need to trace a particular building, for instance, and see what was there before or after. But here's what they look like. The buildings in yellow are wood, the ones in pink are brick. and you see what the streets, looked like and what they were named on that given date. And you get the pretty accurate idea of what the footprint of the building actually looked like. So as you're tracing, if you want to do the history of a particular house, you might be able to look through a series of different, if the house doesn't look today like it did on one of these, you might be able to use these maps to piece together a rough idea of when different additions were put on and so forth. So that's you finding where different businesses might have been located, seeing what the neighborhood looked like that your ancestors lived in can sometimes be enlightening. Because Auburn has changed tremendously. Okay, this area, over here, along Union Street and the railroad tracks, it used to be nothing but shoe factories. So getting an idea of what the town looked like during the early 20th century or the late 19th century can really be an interesting piece before you write your stories up. It would be really neat to do that, to look at that and see how the town itself has changed, because this place looks different to your ancestors than it does today. So we have the Sanborn maps. We have a couple for Auburn, one for Lewiston, but other maps here that to be aware of. Before the Sanborn maps, in 1873, another company did a series of maps as well. And this one's really good. It's the, is it Everton?
Mm-hmm.
Everton and somebody. Who was it? I'm not going to thumb through it. It's the 1873 map it's really useful because it identifies people living in many of the houses. It has their actual name next to the house. And
Do you have copies of, if I were to look in for a certain one in 1873, would you have a copy of that page, or it's just for?
no, I would say just use, this is